Hello, everyone, and welcome to our presentation. I'm Dr. Daniel Chadbourne, and I'll be presenting on behalf of myself and my two colleagues. I'm from New Mexico Highlands University, and my two colleagues who helped work on this project are Dr. Courtney Plant from Bishop's University in Canada and Stephen Reysen from Texas A&M Commerce. So this is fan convention attendance and its influences on existential isolation and social worldview. How we attempted to look at some stuff. We didn't find what we were looking for, but we got some information and insight moving forward. So I'm going to get into that. So a litany of past research has examined the nature of fan identity or the connections that individuals have with their interests and their communities, the groups that they belong to surrounding them. So a lot of this is grounded in social identity theory research. Most of this research is focused on sporting events and games, such as those involved in following and congregating around football in the United States, or internationally, what we would call soccer here in the US. Outside of this, though, the research has been limited. So looking at what we would consider non-sport fan communities in psychology is pretty limited. Outside of psychology, it's well researched, on the other hand. In fact, we know that it's well researched because the amount of participants, the amount of individuals who are congregating to these events has been exponentially growing year to year, going back to some of the first science fiction conventions such as 1939's Worldcon to our modern conventions like ComicCon in San Diego, which in 2019 brought in about 135,000 attendees. These numbers, if we multiply them by the thousands of professional fan-run conventions, meetups, and gatherings across the globe, really offer a lot of potential for psychological research. And many researchers outside of psychology in the fields of sociology, anthropology, marketing, and communications have tasked themselves with studying these fan communities, yet psychology has yet to fully utilize the potential of understanding the social systems and influences at play surrounding these popular events outside of sport, because sport is kind of seen as the prototype, the normative fan community. These other fan communities have kind of fallen to the wayside, at least up until recently. So the purpose of the study was to further investigate how individuals who attend these fan communities and events sort of interact with the world around them and with each other, tied to their identity, and also to examine attendance in comparison to those fans who couldn't make it, examining the influence of attendance on kind of two core factors. So how do attendees and non-attendees differ? And so that's the first main thing we want to look at. And then to expand upon that, we also want to take into account, does this influence, broadly speaking, so if these two groups don't differ, does it broadly influence more positive views about the world? So we got to go to the 9th annual convention for the predominantly adult fan base of My Little Pony Friendship is Magic. This was part of an 10-year study of fandom from its kind of creation and inception, going back to about 2011 to current day. This convention was very important because this convention was kind of the last big hurrahs. It'll be the last BronyCon, and the show itself in its 4th generation, its 7th season, was nearing its end. And so as part of our study sort of examining this, we took attendees from the conference and then also non-attendees from one of their fan sites, Equestria Daily. Some basic information: the average age of our fans tended to be fairly older, so 27. This age has actually been going up very subtly going up since we started collecting it back in 2011, 2012. It was about 77.8% male, which is pretty standard going back to some of the earlier research, and about 77.8% Caucasian, which is also pretty standard going back, though we have some other research that's maybe looking at why we're seeing these larger male percentages, larger predominantly white percentages as well. So we examined this on 3 basic measures as part of this larger study. Duckitt's 2001 Belief in a Just World Scale, both the dangerous world and competitive world subscales. Pinel's et al.'s 2017 Existential Isolation Scale, and then measures of fandom and fanship identity. And like I mentioned before, fandom is connection or identity with the group. Fanship is identity with the interest. So our initial results: do these fans who attended this conference, attended this convention versus didn't attend this convention, did they differ in any meaningful way? And it turns out not a whole lot. They did not differ on measures of existential isolation. They did not differ in measures of belief in a dangerous world and belief in a competitive world. Though we did see that the average scores for belief in a dangerous world were kind of average. So 4 being the midpoint or the midpoint of the scale. So on a 1 to 7 scale, a little lower than average. And then belief in a competitive world was actually pretty significantly or pretty low. And we'll kind of get into some of these. So we thought to ourselves, what now? So we were expecting to see these broader differences, at least with these factors. This was one of our core hypotheses going in. We're trying to figure out why. Why is it that these individual fans don't necessarily see belief in a dangerous world or belief in a competitive world differently, whether they're attending where a lot of these norms of the community would be primed versus if they're kind of stuck at home for this event. And the same thing with existential isolation. We would expect to see that people who were kind of missing out and weren't able to go and hang out with the big fan convention may be a little, or may feel a little more isolated, a little lonelier. What is interesting, though, is that we did find, looking at the fan community as a whole, that identity with one's interest and with one's group were related to the belief in a competitive world, but not a dangerous world. So it turns out that the bronies in this case, these predominantly adult fans of My Little Pony, didn't really view the world any more or less dangerously based on their level of fandom or fanship identity. However, we did see an increase in their belief of a more cooperative world, or I guess a decrease in their competitive world scores. And what essentially we kind of tie this to is that the community itself is tied to a bunch of predominant fans around friendship and tolerance and coming together as a whole and cooperation. And so the norms of the community are going to be far more salient in those with higher fandom and fanship identity. And thus, as expected, they tended to score a little lower on competitive world scores, but not overall on the dangerous world. So what does this mean? So basically, when examining these in relation to overall fandom community interest, we can see that for more fans of a show about positivity, friendship, and colorful ponies in this case, their view of danger in the world wasn't all that relatable, but their view of cooperation was heavily influenced. We would argue, and this ties into some other research that we've published concerning the content that they're exposed to. So we've shown in other research that more exposure and more identity with this show, more content consumption has also led to a greater tendency to engage in pro-social behaviors. And if you're a fan community that is revolving around a lot of pro-social giving and pro-social behaviors, you may be less likely to view the world as a pretty competitive place because your fans and your peers are engaging in more cooperation. So that's kind of our general I guess, assumption with this, or our general conclusions with this. As we move forward, we're going to be kind of moving into follow-up studies and wanting to investigate more. One of the things that I'm personally interested in is whether or not we can apply Duckitt's dual process motivation model of ideology, politics, and prejudice. We know that this influences competitive jungle. We also know that this group is less likely to engage in prejudice. Could we flip this? Could we see maybe a reverse of some of these? Bronies in general tend to be high in openness, high in agreeableness. And so would that be one of those things that instead of low agreeableness and low openness influencing dangerous and competitive worldview, could higher versions of that, we should see a flip in that. And so we could take something like Duckitt's model and this information that we've looked at regarding specifically the competitive jungle side and maybe see a flip in that, sort of a reverse model of less prejudice, more cooperation, maybe a cooperative, positive view through the use of fandom. We're also delving a little deeper into how people talk about their communities, and so we've got some data that we're also building upon in this. attendee versus non-attendee differences and how they talk about their fan communities and how they think about their fan communities and how they record that information down using Luke analysis, or linguistic inquiry and word count analysis, where we're going to analyze their language use and the way that they're engaging or they're communicating about their community. So yeah, so like I said, we are interested in moving forward. In general, these communities didn't differ all that much between the attendees and the non-attendees. But like we said, it may have a lot to do with the communities itself. And we're also looking at how maybe we can like build this into, we do a lot of research, my colleagues and I, with the anime community, with furries, with a number of other fan communities, to see maybe if these communities, once we get back to attending conventions, if these communities are going to show differences in some of these effects, especially when those norms of cooperation and positivity are less salient. So we wouldn't expect to see, you know, those norms as prevalent in something like the anime community, because the anime that they watch are very broad. So with that in mind, thank you for listening to us. Please let us know if you have any questions. Please reach out. We would be more than happy to talk to you further about this. Goodbye.